Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Sir Jeremy Greenstock, who was the UK ambassador to the United Nations from 1998 to 2003. Sir Jeremy, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Good afternoon.
It's been pointed out that President Trump's address at the UN 6 years ago was met with some sniggering, some sort of chortling, and some sort of general air of amusement, and that this time the audience listened very carefully. I don't know if you agree with that, whether that was your observations, and if so, why do you think that is?
I think there was a difference this time round, yes. I think that is largely because since he arrived in the White House in January of this year, he's been doing things. He has had an impact on world trade, on certain theatres of conflict, although not with terrific results yet, on his relationships with allies. We know him a bit better after nearly 5 years in the White House. But the American president carries a lot of power, and he's been amassing perhaps more of that power over the last few months. So people have to pay attention, whether they like what he's saying or not, and they have to show a degree of courtesy because he tends to punish people who don't. So yes, people were sitting up and listening, but perhaps they weren't revealing what they were thinking in their own minds.
I mean, you say limited success in his efforts to broker the conclusion to various conflicts around the world, but by his own account, he has personally solved 7 major world conflicts since taking office. What's wrong with that?
I think he genuinely has a good approach to peace. He doesn't want American forces involved overseas. He doesn't want to be taking over countries and changing them. That's what he says anyway. And I think he does want to end the wars in Ukraine and in Israel-Palestine. And I think that's laudable. I don't believe that the results he's claimed will be regarded by historians as fully fitting the facts so far. But the important thing is that he's interested in promoting peace. And let's hope that he continues with that and has more visible success in the months to come.
Now, I saw you on an appearance on another media outlet in the last 24 hours in which you said, sort of words to the effect, you think President Trump got his audience wrong, that he somehow misread the room. And I just wanted to ask you what you meant by that.
Well, I think that much of the world represented in the General Assembly has expectations of the United States in reaching out to poorer countries, in promoting development assistance at a high volume, being very helpful in Africa and other poorer parts of the world. And the removal of American development assistance and the removal of USAID, the organization that distributes that in Washington, has been noted with some alarm. I think that he, in some of what he said, sounded a bit as though he was talking to an American political audience, lauding his own political approach in the White House, denigrating that of his successor. That doesn't really concern the United Nations, a speaker's domestic situation. That's not normally done in the UN General Assembly in September. So I think he misinterpreted to some extent the nature of the occasion and the nature of his audience. He was very scathing about the scientific approach to climate change, which is of huge concern to most members of the General Assembly, and they would have had different views on that. But they listened politely, and they took the man at face value in that meeting. So there was a bit to say on both sides of this argument, I think.
I mean, he was quite scathing of quite a lot of countries and institutions, notably the institution that was hosting him, the UN. He singled out the fact that the escalator to get him, into the building wasn't working. The teleprompter he was supposed to be using wasn't working. And he seemed to suggest that was a bit of a metaphor for the UN in general terms, suggesting that perhaps the whole institution is broken. I mean, do you think he's got a point that perhaps the UN does need a reboot?
I think he was opportunistic in using those two instances as criticism. It was, after all, the White House that was running his teleprompter, his own team, not the UN. And he managed the escalator very well, so did the First Lady. No, I think he's misreading exactly what the UN is there to do. In its politics, and he is very concerned with politics and geopolitics at the moment, the UN is its member states. It's what nation states do in the forum of the UN collectively and cooperatively to address conflict, to deal with the sins and deficiencies around the world that the UN has to deal with. The UN Secretariat and the agencies are something quite different. And if the US is not funding those agencies as much as it's done in the past, or withdrawing funding now from some of those agencies, it's not their fault that they're less able to do good work. But I think he was talking more about the politics, and the UN from its inception has always been a forum for member states to do what they can do collectively to address the ills of the world. And I think his criticism was to that extent misplaced, because if we didn't have the UN as a forum, we would be shooting each other much more quickly. At least we're talking still, and he's talking at the UN. So he came, didn't he? And he spoke to the assembled company. So it's a mixed picture, and he is critical, and many other people are critical, and institutions, particularly international institutions around the world, probably do fade in their impact if they don't reform. But you mentioned rebooting. It's extraordinarily difficult to get formal reform at the UN. There are too many people who oppose it. So let him make some suggestions, let him seek reform and support it, and we'll see where we can get to.
I just want to ask you about the decision by a number of America's allies, including the United Kingdom, to support the notion of recognizing a Palestinian state. That's all happened in the last week or so. And you were one of 30 diplomats who wrote an open letter calling on the British Prime Minister to do this back in July, I believe. So I'm assuming you're pleased that the British government did that.
Yes, I think that they did the right thing. I think that the Palestinian people deserve that kind of political, if rhetorical, support. It's not going to change the situation on the ground. But in being asked about recognition, I regard this act of recognition as meaning two important things. One, that the Palestinian people have inalienable rights to a political future, to self-determination under the UN Charter, and that should be supported. And secondly, it's saying to Israel, in the way that you have pursued your campaign against Hamas, you have brought the whole Palestinian people in both Gaza and the West Bank, and indeed amongst the diaspora, into a much more degraded position. And you are threatening to take over those two territories, the occupied territories. That is something the United Kingdom and its friends in doing this will not support, do not support, because the only alternative to a two-state solution is Israeli takeover of those territories, and we do not regard that as either legal or acceptable in international diplomacy. That is a strong statement. And I interpret it in that way because that statement needs to be made in our search for peace and security for both peoples, Israelis and Palestinians, in due course living together in a reconciled two-state solution. And that's what I've always been looking for.
So when you hear President Trump saying things like he said, that recognition of the Palestinian state was simply a reward for Hamas. How do you respond to such a charge?
Well, I don't think it will be a reward for Hamas for long. Yes, Hamas gave a very pleased reaction to those recognition statements, and I can see why. But we are doing it for the Palestinian people, and I don't think that the Hamas leadership have ably served the whole Palestinian people, who are immensely suffering at this moment. Hamas will not be allowed by those states that made those acts of recognition to be part of any future Palestinian state government. They will have to lay down both their political and their military weapons. It's for the Palestinian people we're doing this, not for Hamas. So to bat this off as some reward for Hamas is not seeing the whole picture, and I would say not seeing the more important part of that picture.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us and sharing those thoughts with us. Sir Jeremy Greenstock, former UK ambassador to the UN. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thanks, Tom.